And now on the line is Steve Bradley from Rail Lobby Group InterWest. Steve, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, Darren.
Okay, Steve, I last spoke to you on this programme on Near FM in April, although I did an interview in July with Coleman O'Rahilly from West on Track. Since our last interview in April, Steve, there has been a lot of news in terms of the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review, hasn't there? Could you give me an update on the news since April?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot happening. So firstly, we had in July the long-awaited draft version of the strategy was finally released. It was released under the pretext of a public consultation, supposedly on environmental aspects of it, but it's just become a public consultation on everything in there. So that was the first time we got to see what's been proposed for rail right across the island. And it's pretty transformational, to be honest with you. There was a lot of cynicism around about whether the strategy would just play it safe and, make small projections or small proposals. But in reality, there's quite a few, big, interesting and punchy things in there. There's also a lot of things which it's arguably got wrong as well. Shall I start with the things that are in there, Darren? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Go on, yeah.
So in terms of the major proposals, and the big stuff is mostly focused on the north and the northwest, if I'm honest with you, because that's where the gap in the rail map was. So firstly, they're proposing to restore rail between Derry and Letterkenny and between Derry and Portadown. Now, those two things together would enable there to be direct rail service, or hopefully direct rail service, between Letterkenny, Derry and Dublin via Portadown. And it's likely also that would become the main route from Donegal and Derry round to Belfast as well. So that's the first big thing. Secondly, they have proposed that the Western Rail Corridor, and that's the idea of a railway running from Galway up to Sligo. Phase 1 of that opened about a decade ago, has been very successful. Phase 2 has been held up for some time, so that's in these proposals. And that's to connect from Athenry to Claremorris. And what that will do is it'll allow initially freight and then eventually passenger services, because there's a lot of freight coming out of Mayo, especially around Castlebar and Ballina. And the idea is that it'll be able to get down to the new rail line that's being created at Foynes Port. Because at the moment, the rail freight which comes out of Mayo, and a lot of it is for people like Coca-Cola beverages, they ship all around the world. But at the moment, it has to go over to Dublin, and it has to travel at night because there's not enough capacity to do so. So once this phase 2 of the Western Rail Corridor is opened, it'll then run down straight to Foynes and be shipped out that way. Then on the other side of the island, in the northeast, there's a proposal for a new stretch of line running between Belfast and effectively Newry, and that would go through Banbridge. And what that would do is it would ease some of the capacity pressures there are. At the moment, the route between Belfast and Dublin runs through Portadown, and this new route will, that's quite a congested line. This new route will make the journey time shorter, and also will introduce new areas to rail, so places like Banbridge in County Down. There's some other changes as well. There's talk about the fact that at the moment there's no airports on the island that are connected to rail, and that needs to change. Probably the easiest of all the airports on the island to restore, the most likely, I would say, to be restored to rail is Belfast International. It has the railway running along one end of the airport, but it's about a mile from the terminal building. Actually, the easiest to give rail connection to would be the airport in Derry, but the review was pretty non-committal on that. There are other changes as well in other parts of the island, but that's sort of the big picture stuff. So it's bringing rail back to Donegal, to Tyrone. And I forgot to mention as well, this is quite an important one for your listeners, the idea of having a railway line from Portadown through Armagh into Monaghan, Cavan, and then down to Mullingar. And that would provide a connection between Belfast, Mullingar and Galway, and also enable people in Cavan, which is part of the growing commuter belt for Dublin, enable people there to commute, up to Belfast or down to Dublin as well. So that's another key opening. So all in all, the positive stuff is the proposal suggests that rail should be brought back to Donegal, Tyrone, Cavan and Monaghan. And it proposes new routes, intercity routes between Derry and Dublin, and as I mentioned, sort of a faster line between Belfast and Dublin. So that's all the positive stuff that's in there. Shall I talk you through the things which they've got wrong or they've missed out?
Yeah, maybe just talk a bit about the positive stuff first? Am I right in saying that?
Okay.
Am I right in saying, Steve, that most of the positive things that you think the review outlined, like possible decisions to be made, some of them or a lot of them are not going to be made realistically in the short to medium term. It could be over 10 years. Like I'm thinking about Mullingar, for example, and I don't know about Portadown, but like there are a couple of lines where this is my impression talking to Colin O'Rahilly a couple of months ago. My impression was that there are only a couple of lines that are going to be started realistically in the short to medium term. Is that the case, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's realistic. Firstly, infrastructure has very long timescales anyway. That's just the nature of how it works. Secondly, there are very few of these reopenings which are at a stage that you might consider even close to being shovel ready. So if you take Derry Portadown, for example, nobody knows where the route would go through. Nobody knows how you would connect the major towns along that route. So where would the railway station go in Omagh? Where would it go in Dungannon and Strabane? Where would it go in Letterkenny? None of these decisions have been made. Nobody's been out walking the line, looking at where new sections would have to go. So there's a hell of a lot of work still to be done on that. There are some schemes which are in a much better position and could happen much quickly. And phase 2 of the Western Rail Corridor, and that's the bit between Athenry and Claremorris, I would hope and expect that will happen in the next couple of years because the route is there. It has an old railway track on it. It just needs the old track lifted and new one put down because the old track's, it's redundant. It's been there so long. So it's an easy one to do. And there'll probably be a few other schemes around which would be relatively easy to do. But the nature of infrastructure is it's long time scales, public inquiries, planning permission, investing of land, very complicated things. And anybody who sort of thinks or hopes this can be done quickly is probably going to be very disappointed. It's a 30-year plus plan. And I think it's fair to say that, I don't think we can expect much momentum across the entire set of proposals until about 10 to 15 years out, given the lead time involved. So I would say it'll be the next decade, so the 2030s, before we start to see this stuff really getting to go. But with a couple of other schemes like phase 2 of the Western Rail Corridor hopefully happening in the meantime.
Yeah, Coleman O'Rahilly was telling me that the rail proposed for the Western Rail Corridor, the extra rail, is at a very advanced stage. I believe, you can correct me on this if you want, but I believe that Eamon Ryan has said that his kind of number one priority, whether it happens first or second in the list, but his number one priority is connecting Derry to Letterkenny. Is that true, is it?
We would certainly hope that's the case. It's 34 kilometres, so it's not a long distance. Cost-wise, from memory, I think they're looking at about 200 million euros, which I'm sure will sound a lot to your listeners, but for infrastructure, that really isn't a lot. That would get you very little road built. But what it would do is it would connect the two largest towns in the whole northwestern corner of the island together. So that's Derry City with a population of about 108,000 and Letterkenny with a population of 22,000. The two places are also connected in what's called the Northwest City Region. So they, along with Strabane, function as a city region and will increasingly do so over time. So it makes perfect sense for them to be connected. It's relatively low cost. It's relatively small distance. And there's also the possibility of EU support. Donegal's, the region that Donegal is in was downgraded 3 years ago by the EU and is considered to be no longer a developed area. Instead, it's classed as in transition. And that means there are structural funds and other money available. So we'd be delighted if Minister Ryan was happy to go ahead and make that work. There would be a small section of it on the northern side of the border, but we're really talking 2 or 3 miles probably. So it would be great if that could be done and could happen as soon as possible. The chances are the south will be able to move much quicker on all of these plans than the north. As we know, the north has no government at the moment. Secondly, even when it does have a government, it tends to drag its feet to be quite slow. And thirdly, it doesn't have the budget surpluses and the funding that the Republic has. So I'd be very hopeful, and we'd certainly be very grateful if Minister Ryan or his successor did crack on and get Letterkenny to Derry connected up, and it would be fantastic news as well for County Donegal.
It'd be fantastic, yeah. Okay, Steve, we haven't got a lot of time left. Can you just maybe give me a summary of what you and InterWest are disappointed with that wasn't in the draft rail review?
Yeah, so the biggest glaring omission is that the proposal is to leave just one county on the island without any rail, and that's County Fermanagh. And we think that's just unacceptable. To basically say that one county doesn't deserve a basic level of infrastructure that everybody else should be entitled to, it just looks terrible, and we think it'll leave a really negative, taste in the mouth and a bad legacy for this proposal. So we're working hard to try and get it overturned and ensure that Enniskillen, which is an important county town, which does meet the minimum population requirements set out in the review to get a railway station, to ensure that that's connected back to rail. So that's one, bringing rail back to Fermanagh. Secondly, I mentioned that rail going to Letterkenny will be great for the county, but the problem is Letterkenny is in the northeast corner, and the entire rest of Donegal will be left without any rail under these proposals. So almost all the county will be without rail. So we're pushing and working with colleagues like West On Track to see rail taken from Letterkenny through Donegal down to Sligo and creating a spine of rail right down the middle of Donegal. And that would finally close the gap in the map, as we call it. Your listeners may have seen a map of the railway network in Ireland, where you have this huge hole in the northwest corner. And restoring rail between Derry and Portadown will help reduce that. But you're still going to have Fermanagh and almost all of Donegal without rail, so it's important those things get addressed. And then other geographically smaller points. The proposal is for Derry to Dublin railway line to be the only railway line between cities which doesn't run at 200 kilometres an hour. There's no explanation for that. We think it's unacceptable. Derry is one of the 7 core cities on the island. It's acknowledged so in this strategy, yet for some reason it's the only one of those core cities that won't have 200-kilometre rail. That needs to change. There's also other proposals. We think rail needs to go back to Mid-Ulster, to Cookstown in particular. We think it's bad that the review seems to have not factored in tourism. Tourism is really important in certain counties, north and south, particularly Fermanagh and also Donegal. So we think that they need to factor in the impact that tourism can have there. And finally, on rail freight, the review says that there should be rail freight terminals near the major cities around the island, yet there isn't one for Derry. And there's only one for the entire island. If you draw a line north between Sligo and Dublin, there's only one for the entire northern chunk of the island. And it's in Portadown, and it's really aimed towards the east of Northern Ireland and east of Ulster. So we're arguing that there should be a rail freight terminal as well, close to Derry City, next to Foyleport. Foyleport has a railway line running right beside it. It has dual carriageway access. It has an airport there. It has a lot of land that is both used currently for industrial purposes and zoned for that. It has 1,000 acres of land zoned for industrial use. It's an ideal location to have a rail freight terminal, and it would do wonders for the entire northwest region as well. So overall, the review is a good start. There's things in there we're happy about, but as you can see from that list there's still quite a few things that need to get right as well.
Okay, great. Okay, Steve, it's great talking to you today, first time in a few months. Before you go, can you tell me if you're aware, because I know there's a lot of uncertainty with some aspects, but can you tell me what the next steps are with the rail review over the next few weeks or months?
So the review had, last Friday was the deadline for comments on a public consultation. And it's likely that they will have had quite a lot of comments, including raising those issues I just mentioned. What will then happen is it needs to be signed off north and south. That's very easy in the south. Eamon Ryan will basically have it put in front of him, the final version, and he'll be asked to approve it, which will make it an official government strategy. And the problem is we don't have anybody in the north to sign it off, so that will have to be tackled. But once it's signed off, all that means is that government north and south thinks this is the way forward. It doesn't assign any money to it, and it doesn't say it definitely will happen. So each of the individual proposals in there, so Derry Letterkenny, Derry Portadown, the new railway line between Belfast and Dublin, for example, they will each individually have to go through a process of proving their business case. So we'll start with a feasibility study. People will have to go out and look physically, where are these lines going to go? How is that going to work? How much is it going to cost? And then once they have those cost details, somebody will have to sit down and say, is this value for money? For every euro we spend, how much will we get back in terms of economic activity and everything else? And then once that's done, any scheme which gets through all that process will then have to have the funding allocated. So we're really at the very early stages of the journey towards delivering this stuff, which is part of why it's going to be so many years before anybody even sees shovels in the ground for these things. But all those steps have to happen. There's no way around this. Lots of work to be done. But the sooner we can get signed off north and south, hopefully with the amendments which we've requested, then the sooner we can crack on and start to see it all being delivered.
So are you saying that the government in the Republic of Ireland, which is operating for another year and a half, would they not be able to decide in the lifetime of this government over the next year and a half that they're going to, for example, reinstate the rail between Derry and Letterkenny?
They could, yeah, I mean, any government can decide anything, and then the next government can scrap it. We've seen that in England with the HS2 railway line, where they spent tens of billions of pounds digging holes and tunnels all around the country, and they've now decided to scrap it. So no government decision is ever written in stone until the stone is until it's written and polished. What the current government will do in the short time it has, I suspect it'll basically make that phase 2 of the Western Rail Corridor between Athenry and Claremorris happen. It'll probably get the ball rolling on things like Derry Portadown, which we're told scored the highest of any railway opening on the island. We're told that there's an estimation of 3 million passengers a year, which by Irish standards is pretty high. So, the core ingredients seem good for that scheme, and I would hope the current government, north and south, will start to get the ball rolling on that. But as I said, it's much more likely that the next government, whoever that will be, whatever shade of politics that will be in a position to really take these things forward and get them to a stage where they either can't or won't be stopped by any future government. But it's hard to see very much being done in the next 12 months. I'm sure the government, because they commissioned this review, will want to do as much as they can. But, the clock is against them. They've only got pretty much 12 months or so until the next election.
They could still, I don't know about the Northern Ireland Executive, because we haven't got one at the moment, but in the Republic of Ireland, the government could still kind of accept the rail review as being kind of policy. It might be implemented for a while, but they could accept it over the next 12 months, could they?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the first step really is sort of to adopt it and say, this is good. We agree with this stuff. We want it to happen, and we're going to take it forward and officially, give it over to the Department for Transport and say, break down these projects, work out how much it's going to cost, work out where they're going to go, and start making it happen. So the hope is that they will be doing all that really important work over the next 12 months.